Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay over there in the back? Great. I can barely hear myself, but that's good. Right, first of all, I would like to start with thanking everyone involved with inviting me. You guys did not know what you were doing because I have never done anything like this before. So you guys are my first audience. So who am I? I got a brief presentation here, very nice. I work at Hazelight, where I'm a senior cinematic editor. I've done other things. I started off as an actor. I was an actor for 15 years, and that's actually the first time I went to Vilnius was to shoot a TV show here for a Swedish TV. Yes, we're from Stockholm, Sweden, at Hazelight. Through that, I got to start working at Hazelight by getting invited to do mocap sessions for a game called A Way Out. So that was my way in. we didn't have a lot of money, and we ended up mocapping every single character ourselves. It was just me, Joseph, who you might know as Fuck the Oscar guy. He was very much in there with me, and Oscar, our studio manager. So we did all that ourselves in the DICE offices. Actually, one of the Habibis would know. So when I got this question to come here and have a speech, my first question was, why? Why would you want to have me here? And what would I even say? What would be a reasonable content of a talk for a group of maker of things? I had to rack my brain a little bit. And then how would I go about presenting that thing, right? How would I present it in a way that makes sense, not only for the talk, but only for you guys, in a way that captures the core of it. Now, my theme and my core intention here is to use as little as possible. I've been through a couple of these different conferences, and I'm always struck by the visuals and the bombacity of these presentations, because we're all, amongst very talented people. I'm fully aware. So I'm going to take a risk here, and I hope that you're going to stay with me throughout the whole speech and see that it might even be worth it. So I'd like to start off with saying, what is good enough? Like, we need to define some terms here. How many of you guys have heard, like, yeah, it's good enough? Because I'm assuming most of you guys are makers of things. Yes, there's a few of you. But what does that mean? It's very contextual, and it can be pretty vague. And most of the time, in my experience, it's very subjective. It's depending on who you're asking. Are you asking your mom or your boss? Your mom might be a little bit more lenient, most times, I would hope. So in order to be able to answer the question of what is good enough, we need to start with what is the intention? What is the thing we're trying to make? And in order to establish our intention, or at least articulate it in a way that's productive and gives direction, we need to ask these questions that I asked myself. Now, these are my core questions. I repeat them to the effect of making my team almost want to throw up at me. But it's a very, very important thing. And I realize I'm talking about something that is very fundamental. I think most of you guys in here are probably already doing this. I think there isn't an enough way to do this. So, now we can start asking what good enough is. One, we have established our core intention. So my core intention today is to underscore and underline the importance of these questions. And I'm hoping by the end of my speech or my talk that you have a new perspective on these and find a new way to apply them to your own work. Because I'm assuming everyone in here is making something. You might be an animator, or you might be an editor just like me, or a programmer, or even you work in production and you're making schedules and deadlines and plans. So this right here, this question, is it doing the thing? That's the answer to that question is what's informing the rest. Is it doing the thing? Is it communicating what we're trying to communicate at its very simple form? at its essence. If it isn't, then that's when we need to iterate. How many of you guys have heard find a way to fail fast and cheap? And what is that sound? Not the hips? Okay. Quite a few of you, yeah? I've heard that too. Didn't know what that meant. Like, I don't know how to translate that into actual things that I do on a daily. So we need to stay true to our core intentions. By asking these 3 questions, we can start to articulate our core intentions. There's a pitfall that I'd like to just kind of like wave at and say, please don't do this. Please don't chase cool. I've been fortunate enough to be around the world, not as much as one of the Habibis that was just up here, but I've been around the world a couple of times. And one thing that I've found a pattern in is people asking for, yeah, but what's the water cooler moment in this sequence? What's the thing that people are going to talk about afterwards when they're standing at the water cooler, I guess? Problem with this is it's a shiny object. Cool doesn't really mean anything unless it aligns with your core intentions. Now, if you've played some of our games, A Way Out or It Takes Two, I don't know if I would say there's a shortage of moments that one would argue would be a water cooler moment. There's quite a few in It Takes Two. One being when you dismantle a very cute elephant and rip her ears off. That would be one of those moments. However, that came from, what are we trying to do here? What exactly are we trying to communicate? So it wasn't a cool moment that we wanted to force in there. It came from our core intentions. And at Hazelight, we probably would stand proud and say, we're risk takers. So we take our core intentions and we try to push it as far as we possibly can in order to be very precise in our communication. And I think, maybe somewhat naively, that's what you guys can see. And that's why we've been fortunate enough to be received so warmly. How many of you have heard about this? The Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. This is it's everywhere. I've seen it in sports. I played baseball for many years. I've seen it in school. I've seen it pretty much everywhere. But it's always applied differently. Sometimes it talks about effort. Sometimes it talks about time. And sometimes, hopefully, it's applied in a way of communication. If we're able to communicate 80% of what we're trying to communicate with bare essentials, like a black screen with white text, we're almost there. The rest is polish. The rest is tweaking and presentation. So one of you, or maybe more of you, might ask, like, okay, so if I'm going to chase simplicity in everything that I do, I will only use the bare minimum of elements. How do I then get to ripping an ear off an elephant in a game about 2 parents going through a divorce? Well, by layers. We'd never set out to make something complex and difficult. We always go, what's the simplest way? What's the path of least resistance? Wow, that's a tongue twister. Path of least resistance. And then we start layering. It's almost like an onion, right? It's very simple at its core, and then you just start layering simple elements on top of it until all of a sudden you take a step back and you go, wow, that's a complex thing. How do we get about doing that? We did try, and we fell in the pitfall very early in production to make something complex, to make something cool, to make something. We tried even to use the word fun as a metric. Like, what's the fun factor in this sequence? Or what's the fun factor in this game mechanic? It's
just as difficult to quantize that as it is to answer the question, well, what's good enough then? It's subjective. I don't know. You might think something's fun that I hate personally. Hate is a strong word. Dislike, let's say. But there's levels to this. Now, these three questions, in my opinion, can be applied on anything. As a maker of things, we might have a couple producers in here that are working on production plans and stuff. We might have a few animators that are looking at a specific sequence or doing the motion matching system or whatever it may be. If you always go back to the what, why, and how, you'll be good. I want to bet my left arm on it even. That's how much I believe in this stuff. So core intention is key. And we use this to answer all questions that might come up during production. It might be a creative one, it might be a production one. Most of the time, we go for the path of least resistance, and we say, well, ideally, in a perfect world, we would like to have this, this, and that included in a specific sequence. And then we go, okay, we can't afford 2 or 3 out of those things. How can we still communicate the thing we're trying to communicate with something cheaper? So we always go for the cheap option. But then, by the time we've implemented the cheap thing, we realized, oh, shit, we saved, I don't know, 3 weeks. What do we do with those 3 weeks? And then we start layering. We just add another simple thing, and then another simple thing, and then we end up with It Takes Two, or A Way Out. So, when asking this, what does that give you as a tool that you can apply today? Because that's very much my core intention, is to give you guys something that you can go home or to work and go, hey, I'm going to try this thing, like literally today. It allows you to do direct iteration. Is it doing the thing? No? All right, make it do the thing. Is it doing the thing? Yes, move on. There's always that next thing that needs to happen. And hopefully, you know, you've gone through most of the things you need to do the thing, and then you find yourself almost with a horizontal type slice of your project instead of a vertical slice. And that way you can take a step back and you can go, wait, this needs more work. This isn't really communicating as clearly as we wanted to communicate. However, this part over here, the later half, let's say, is working fine. It needs polish, and we need to work on presentation, but it's saying what we wanted it to say. And now you can reallocate your resources to make sure that you're spending time on the things that matter most. Now, we're all going to be faced with limitations. And most people that I have this conversation with find them frustrating, annoying, and disruptive. But I look at this as creative dynamite. This is where most of my work is. How do I make this work in a week or 2 weeks with very limited resources? Maybe, you know, now that I'm up here thinking about it and talking to you about it, maybe this whole hunt for simplicity actually came from this, because I didn't really have a choice. So in most studios, Hazelight is, I think, 87 people strong at this point. That's as many as we've ever been. Most teams that ship with 2.5 hours, roughly, of cinematic content have multiple editors working on that. We don't. It's just me. I'm the cinematic team. Well, of course, I have help with, you know, we got the guys over at VFX, and we got my animators and my artists, and it's very much a team effort, but all the editing is done by one person. So how can I possibly have time for that? Well, make it simple. Make it very simple. Make it, what is the thing we need it to do? Even if it's about one scene, a whole sequence, or maybe even one shot. There's always the cool shot to choose. That's the easy choice. But the story is what's driving our game, so I needed to tell something. I need to say something with the camera. Now, this one is big. This one is huge. I find when you have your core intentions aligned, and I'm looking at game like directors most of the time when I'm having this conversation, your direction needs to be clear. You need to state your core intentions so that you can your team can align behind you. But this is also true for anyone working in the team. That core intention, that's how you express it when you work. How you solve problems. That's basically putting yourself into using your voice. And that's the most important thing, I think, because we're all artists, right? So how does this thing lead to doing less but actually getting more? Well, you're buying time. You're buying resources. I'm not leveraging 4 weeks of animation time to do a really cool thing because I just needed to do this one thing, and it's very simple. And then I can step back and say, wait, okay. Most of the time, I'd like to put extra effort in the beginning of the game, because when you sit down and you start playing it, I want you to go, oh shit, these guys really thought this through. So that's going to take some extra time, right? And then you get to the middle of the game. I want to have something there that makes you go, ooh, they're increasing intensity somehow, right? And then at the end, of course, we want to leave on a high note. So there's some sort of catharsis. Like, those are my 3 most expensive times. That's when I can spend. Everything in between, I'm buying time for those 3. How many of you guys have heard about feature creep? Yeah. Where does that come from, you think? Any idea? I think it comes from chasing cool. That's the pitfall. Like, yeah, this is a good mechanic, but wouldn't it be cool if we also added an inventory system with the crafting? Yeah, maybe. Does it align with the core intentions? If yes, you might need it from the get-go. If no, then don't. There's nothing good coming out of a chaotic game. How many of you have heard of, or seen at least, complex user interfaces? Pretty common. That's another thing right here. It needs to be really simple and easy to read. Why are we making them complex? Because it looks cool. It might not work as great, but damn, those screenshots, right? Narrative bloating is another, oh, I've seen this quite a few times. What is this scene doing? What is this sequence doing? Well, it's cool because like we're building, it's world building, and we need it to make sure that the players are enjoying the world. Yeah, that's cool. Are we making an open world game? No. So why are we doing this? Side quest. No need. It's taking away from our core intentions. Here's another one. Complicated game mechanics. Now, this is something I don't think you can put on Hazelight. If you've played, I always think about it, A Way Out, when I talk about this. But if you played A Way Out, which was our first game, you might realize that there's a lot of different mechanics going on in that game. You might even say, we just put all of them in there. And you wouldn't be wrong. But they're only good enough. If you put our shooting mechanics next to a shooter, oof, we're gonna be hurting. It is not holding up. But if you play it for 30 minutes, which is basically maybe an hour, you might stand it for an hour. You might forgive us for not being perfect. Overscoping is another thing. Overscoping to me is feature creeping with extra steps. So one last question. Did I do the thing? Did I communicate effectively using bare minimum visual aids, for example. That was the risk I decided to take on this. And I'm hoping I did the thing. I'm hoping you guys leave this conversation with a newfound perspective on core questions, core intentions, and why that's so important. It's fundamental. I'm hoping you have a few questions for me too.
Okay, thank you for your speech. Okay, does anyone has a question? Yeah, okay, 1 second. So people on the roof, you can also ask questions, just raise your hand.
Hello.
Hello.
Great speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, how do you balance the complexity of explanations inside a game when your audience has varying levels of understanding of video games, for example, as It Takes Two really brought, I would say, casual audience as well as hardcore players to the game?
We use a lot of UXR in our projects. So UXR, for those guys who don't know, it's user experience research. We do excessive user experience research. And basically, what we're trying to get out of those is, are we communicating effectively to a large enough group of people? Are our intentions clear? So I think for It Takes Two, I want to say that we did a double digits UXR tests. So we had, I think, 10 or 12 throughout the whole process. And It Takes Two was a 3.5-year development cycle, if I'm not mistaken. And I think we started our first UXR because we work in horizontal slices. So we basically blocked out the whole game, and we took a step back and we said, listen, that's not working, this not working, that's not working. But that's working great already. We can see this working. And that's how we can start UXR testing that early. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool, man.
Okay, more questions? Okay, then maybe I ask you one to warm up the audience.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So how do you think, is there any exceptions of the rule? So maybe sometimes you need to go a little bit more complex. For example, maybe there are some genres of games when people really, core auditory really like when it's go complicated, like maybe strategy, stuff like that. What do you think about that? Makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, this is also subjective, right? So the perspective I would take on this is, why are you making it complex? Are you making it complex because it's cool? Or does it need to be? Is there a reason that you can defend somehow and saying, yes, we need it to be complex because it won't do the thing unless it is? Then you're still adhering to these, right? It's just complex standing next to something else that's obviously very simplistic.
Okay. And what do you think? Is it going to work the same for big teams? Like, I don't know, hundreds, maybe more people working on the project, I think, or it should be just implemented on every level, then it's going to work, or... Because I think Hazelight is not really big studio. I think you have like a few dozen people, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. So is it scalable, I guess, is the question. Yeah, I believe so. I've worked at a AAA studio as well. I did a quick tour over in the Czech Republic. Worked at Hangar 13. You guys know them from Top Spin was the latest release, and before that it was Mafia. So that's a pretty big studio. I think locally in Brno, where I was, we had upwards of 300 people. And then we have they had another office in Brighton in the UK, and there was another 50, 70 or so. And then over in California, we had another department, another office, and they were about the same, 25, 30, 50. So I would say that's still a sizable team. We're not Rockstar, right? But there's levels to everything. And I think when you get to the point where you're triple-digit people, when you're that many people in a team, this becomes even more important because you need to break stuff down. And now you have introduced middle management in order to rack this whole team and organize everything. So that person and everyone below and above needs to simplify things. Because if you don't, your velocity is going to die. And it's like turning the Titanic. The more people you have, the longer your turning radius. So it becomes impossible to be flexible unless you simplify.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone has questions? Okay, one more.
My man.
We have time, so
my guy.
be my
What's
guest.
up?
Yeah.
What's
I
your
have
name,
so
by
many
the way?
questions. Martinas.
Matthias. Nice to meet you.
You spoke a bit about horizontal slices, and I wanted to, maybe you can expand on the pipeline. You still do vertical slices, of course, but which comes first? Do you do a whole block out of the game and then decide to do a vertical slice of an exact point?
So, that's a good question, thank you. At Hazelight, we don't use vertical slices. We have introduced, as of this unannounced project currently being worked on, quality high bars. So we have like a beautiful little corner, and that's a vertical slice-ish. But it's only for the art team. And then here's a scene pushed to final, but only for animation. So we kind of like segmented that out. We're focusing more on a horizontal slice because the sooner we can get to assembling some sort of start, middle, and end, that's when we can step back and reallocate resources. And if we need to make a big change, we want to make it as early as possible because that way we haven't invested a lot of time in developing that thing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And I think most of the time, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, most of the time, vertical slices are for publishers. They want to look at a thing and go, yeah, we're spending money on this because it looks cool or whatever, right? I don't have a lot of faith in publishers' ability to judge whether or not a project is worthy to be produced. But that's my perspective.
And a follow-up question to that is, do you think that only works for narrative-driven games, where the whole picture is more important than minute-to-minute or second-to-second gameplay?
I don't know. I think if you're making a looter shooter, you kind of want to make then your horizontal slice would be, what's your game loop, right? Is it working from moment to moment? I have a few friends, there's a few guys that dropped off of Hazelight and they started their own studio. And they're making something that is closer to what you would describe as a looter shooter type thing. It's like a mix between Sea of Thieves and Faster Than Light. It's called Jump Ship. They just announced. It's very different. It isn't narratively driven, but they're still applying the same principles. So I would venture to say, don't take my head off, but I would venture to say that yes, horizontal slices can be more beneficial than a vertical slice from a perspective of how do I allocate my resources?
Thank you. You've given a lot to think about.
Thanks, man.
Okay, more questions? Okay, yeah.
Do you end up having the issue with horizontal slices that some departments are just not getting anything to do? Because from what I'm imagining, like the art passes, the everything.
We haven't really had that problem. There's always something to do, we found. Sure, you're not making a lot of materials at that point. I mean, to be fair, there are some things that you might wait with. But it hasn't been a problem filling everyone's time. There's also, you could also argue that during our horizontal slices, because we're working in passes, so we do multiple, again, with the simple, we'll do the thing first and then we'll start layering with simple object on top of that. There's R&D time there to be had as well. I don't know, you guys might be looking into, if you guys are running Unreal like we are, we needed to evaluate whether or not we wanted to use Lumen. Now that's a perfect space to do that, because now you have a lot of content from different departments and something to work on, right? Same goes with Nanite. Some might say that it's ready for production, some might not say that it is. We have a specific issue where, since we're doing split screen games, we still want to hit, 60 frames in 1080p, but we're rendering the screen twice. So that puts a different limits on us than it might do for a single player narratively driven game. I hope that answers your questions. Yeah, thanks.